everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now, today I'm honoured to be speaking with sports psychologist Christian Zepp. Christian, welcome to the Sports Psych Show.
Welcome, Dan. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Dan.
You're more than welcome. Really excited to be talking to you today. To get us started, why don't you introduce yourself to the Sports Psych Show audience?
Sure. As you mentioned, my name is Christian Zepp. I'm from Germany, located in Cologne, and originally I studied sports sciences in Germany. In Germany, you can go two different ways in order to work in sports psychology. You either study sport sciences and then make your majors and further education in sports psychology, or study psychology and then make some additional courses, complete some additional courses on sports sciences. So I went the first way, studied sports sciences first, and after my studies, I moved to Cambodia, Southeast Asia, to work there as the national head coach, national team coach for the disabled volleyball, standing volleyball team. Did that from 2007 to 2010. Moved back and forth during that time, and once I came back, I worked here in therapy first, and afterwards I relocated back to Cologne and started working at the German Sports University, where I'm still working now for 11 years. Started working there in 2009. And did my PhD in sports psychology, then focusing on team facilitation, team development. And I think today I'm one of those scientist practitioners. So I'm working 50% at the university, being a lecturer there and researcher. And on the other hand, I usually say the other 100% I'm working in applied sports psychology. Working with national team federations, for example, the national table tennis team here in Germany, or other individual athletes, federations, smaller clubs, from junior level to Olympic level. So that's basically what I usually do at the very moment.
So it sounds like you've got a diverse education. You spend your time within academia and education researching, and 50% of your time consulting. So you'll have a real good understanding of the landscape of sports psychology within Germany. And I'd like to tease your knowledge of that for a little bit here, just to start with. And actually what I'll do is I'm going to start with a quote, and it's quite a famous quote here, and it's from an English soccer striker, Gary Lineker, if you remember Gary Lineker, and he's a big personality over here in England. And he said this. He said, football is a simple game. 22 men chase a ball for 90 minutes, and at the end, the Germans always win.
Right.
At the end, the Germans always win. And he was saying this after England got knocked out by Germany in the semi-finals of Italian 90, the World Cup in 1990. And I think that's the perception, certainly in Britain, is German competitors, I suppose not just in football, soccer, but across sports, is one of, I suppose, toughness, resilience, a stoic mindset, strength. Is that completely stereotypical? Is that a fair viewpoint? And with that, what is the landscape there of sports psychology? Is everybody just really mentally strong out there, or is sports psychology quite prominent?
Actually, I disagree. Unfortunately, Germany doesn't always win it, no matter what sport it is. And I think it's very interesting that people experience the Germans to be like that, to be as stoic, resilient, tough as you said. And I'm not sure if that's really the case. I think that's part of the subjective distortion, I think, that we usually have. We always think others are better and I am worse than everyone else. And I definitely believe that's definitely not the case. And to answer the question about the role of sports psychology in Germany, I think we could do a lot better. We always strive to do better. Usually, we definitely believe, and know, or we think we know, that sports psychology should be more important in sports in Germany. Very interestingly, right now, today is the annual conference of the German Sports Psychology Association. And the discussion there is always the same. We are not as important as we should be. Our role is not accepted by the federations, not by the athletes, by the coaches yet. It's always the same for the last 10, 15 years. And when we are looking, for example, to the UK, when we're looking to the United States, when we're looking to Australia, for example, always even looking to Asia, we always think that they are a lot better. They have better opportunities working in sports psychology with sports psychologists in federations, etc. I truly believe that, for example, the USA is definitely one of a kind when it comes to sports psychology and the acceptance of sports psychology there. And I definitely can't say anything about the UK. However, I realized that, especially in the academies, in the Premier League, for example, for those clubs, that the acceptance is a lot better compared to Germany. So maybe the UK tries to reduce the gap between Germany and or German players and English players, for example, by pushing more money into sports psychology in the academies, because we as Germans are as strong as you believe we are. However, I believe that, to make my point, that in the UK, for example, in the academies, the role of sports psychology is a lot higher, is a lot more prominent than compared to Germany. We're not where we want to be at the moment. And yeah, I think the subjective distortion is the important point. We are not as good as everyone thinks, maybe.
Why is that, Christian? What objections do you get from coaches in Germany towards sports psychology or the practice of sports psychology?
Yeah, I think it's getting better. It's getting a lot better. The objections are, we don't need that. I don't have the time for that. We don't have the time for that. Very famously, 3-4 years ago, when I started working in one academy, and they developed a huge sports psychology program for that academy, some of the coaches said, well, I don't want to give one training session per week, no, per month, it was per month, to a sports psychologist to conduct a workshop there, because I want our players to train and practice during that time. And interestingly, one of the managers then said, well, to the coach, if you need this training session to make your players better in football, if you really rely on that one training session per month, then I think you as a coach are not doing a job that's good enough. Then maybe we really need to look for another coach, because one sports psychology workshop per month, I mean, you know what I'm talking about, is basically nothing for athletes. So coaches still believe that the physical training is more important than the mental game, and that athletes should try to find their own time for making room for sports psychology. And I think, and I truly believe that we have to go hand in hand with coaches. We have to not try to convince coaches. We have to try to understand the needs of the coaches and maybe the objections of the coaches. And we as sports psychologists have to understand, how can we support you? What is it that you need? And not go into a conversation with the coach and pointing fingers at the coach and you need this, you need that. And I think that is important for us.
So it's understanding the needs of the coaches and speaking their language and understanding the environment they're operating in. Yeah,
right. And I believe that some coaches think that we do not understand because maybe we haven't been. That's one thing I've heard, especially in football. Well, you haven't been a pro. You do not know what it feels like to be a professional football player, for example. And unfortunately, some of the coaches are still the old-fashioned way, and they still think, well, we don't need it. If you do need a sports psychologist, you're not strong enough to become a champion. You're not strong enough to go to the Olympics. You're not strong enough to play in the pro team. And those are things that we have to tackle. However, it's getting better, and I really do not want to do our coaches here in Germany a disservice. Most definitely not. It's getting a lot better, and coaches are understanding the importance of sports psychology, the benefits of sports psychology, not only for themselves but especially for the athletes. And I think that's due to the hard work that we are putting into working with coaches, not alongside coaches, not next to each other, but together. I think that's important. We have to work together, and I believe that's the same thing with parents, coaches and parents. It's pretty much the same relationship as coaches and sports psychologists at some point. Sometimes you think you have to manage the parents as a coach, but it's not about managing the parents. It's collaborating. It's cooperating with parents. It's working together with the parents. And I believe we have to get into that relationship. And I believe we are improving there. But yeah, it will still take some time until we definitely have the role, the acceptance that we think that we deserve, so to speak.
Are there actually specific things that you're doing, maybe at your university, maybe across Germany, to help coaches understand sports psychology and bring it into their environment? Is there a joint operation, or is it very much just independent sports psychs, knocking on doors, having casual conversations, striving to be a little bit persuasive?
Mm-hmm. I think it's both. However, I believe, and that's from my academic perspective right now, from what I see in the German Sports Psychology Association, and the collaboration with many federations and the German Olympic Sports Confederation, that we are working collectively towards improving the knowledge about sports psychology. And I believe that we're making huge steps forward. There are different projects, and we see, for example, at university, that the acceptance of sports psychology, especially in regard to working with coaches and, for example, working on the mental health of coaches, which is important and sometimes forgotten, that coaches have needs as well. And it's not only sports psychology, it's not only about working with athletes, but with coaches and the mental health side of the coaches as well. That, for example, the acceptance rose over the last years. We had 3-4 years ago, we had a major project there on mental health in coaches, with workshops, with individual coaching sessions, with coaches from all over Germany. And everyone rated those interventions, no matter if it's been the workshops or the individual coaching sessions, as very helpful. And that's basically one of the approaches that we take. We try to go collectively as different universities, as the ASP, which is the National Association in Germany, to the coaches, understand the needs of the coaches, and show them that sports psychology might be beneficial for themselves as human beings, as persons, but also in their profession.
Let's crack on with your own personal brand of delivering sports psychology. Do you deliver through a number of your own overarching philosophies or frameworks? How do you go about sports psychology consulting?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a very important and very interesting question. When I started working in sports psychology, I didn't think about my philosophy. And that's even the case for me working as a coach many years back. I didn't think about who am I and who do I want to be and what is my identity as a coach or what is my identity as a sports psychologist. I never did that. And then a few years back, 5 or 6 years back, I started to think about, okay, now I realize what is working, what is not working. I observed others, other sports psychologists, other coaches, and then I thought, right, what did I learn from them? What do I think, what does my approach need to be? And that's when I started thinking about my personal philosophy and my personal identity when I'm referring to me in working in sports psychology. And one of the major points, and I'm always referring to that when I'm working with athletes, with coaches, and with my students at university, is that I serve and teach. I'm there for the person behind the athlete. I'm there for the person behind the student or the coach, no matter who you are. And I think it's very important to keep in mind that there's a human being behind the athlete that you're working with. For example, when I'm now, for example, referring to football, and there is that athlete who's not performing well, and then the coach approaches me and says, well, Chris, can you talk to him? He's not scoring goals. He's, just fix him.
Yeah.
You know that. All right. I try to talk to that athlete, with that athlete, but I'm not talking with the player. I try to understand the person behind that player. And maybe his girlfriend broke up with him a week ago, and now he's not on the field. He's not on the pitch with his attention. He's by his girlfriend or with his girlfriend. So serving the person, serving the human being behind the athlete is important, and I believe not only in sports psychology but in all professions. For example, also in coaching, and then teaching everything that I know is important to me, because if I only hold back a fraction of what I know during a conversation, if I only hold back a fraction of that, I believe that I'm doing this athlete, the person, a disservice. And that's something I definitely try to prevent. When I'm working with someone, I always hope that we only meet once. And usually that's not the case. I know that, but that's at least my approach. That I try to give us away as much knowledge as possible, so that the person can help him or herself in the future. And I believe that is important. That it's about you working with the person and not trying to build a connection where the other person depends on me and my knowledge. And usually that's been my approach when I was working with coaches, as a coach as well. I always try to educate the athletes in a way that they can decide on their own when they're on the court what is the next strategy that we should use or apply. How could I change my technique in this very moment. I'm not relying on my coach telling me what to do next. I'm the expert for myself, and I believe that's crucially important to develop and educate experts for themselves, and not building a connection where people rely on me being there.
I think that's really interesting, and just reflecting back some of the things you said there, I love that idea of identity, knowing who I am. Obviously, you're speaking about a sports psychologist, but you've been a coach. So who am I as a coach? You know, when I've learnt from others, what have I learnt from them? So I'm hearing you talk about the importance of self-skills, self-reflecting, becoming self-aware, in order for you to be the best that you can be. Mm-hmm. And then you moved on to this idea of serve and teach. And I love that phrase because they almost seem like opposites. I serve and I teach, because I think sometimes when we think of teaching, we think of I hold the knowledge, I hold the power. But it sounds to me like you're trying to put yourself on the same level as the player. You're a servant to your group of players, your group of people, and then you're delivering what knowledge you can in order for them to become an expert on, yes, their sport, but themselves and what they need. And so my question there, just digging a little deeper into that, because I think that's something that's so challenging for coaches. It's something that's so challenging for coaches, is this notion of, I suppose, autonomy supportive coaching. Mm-hmm. Helping players become experts of themselves and experts of what they need and they need for their growth. When you reflect back on your coaching and how you operate as a sports psychologist, speaking with a coach to help them develop these skills, what specific skills are you helping them develop? This is coaches, to be able to help players become their own expert, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Very important question. I'm referring to the self-determination theory there, I think.
Take me through that.
Yeah, sure. So self-determination theory has been developed in the United States by DC and Ryan, and they are referring to three psychological needs that we as human beings have. And the one is, you already mentioned it, is autonomy. We need to have autonomy in order to feel well. And there's a major body of research showing that especially autonomy supportive climates are especially beneficial for athletes, for their motivation, for reducing dropout rates, etc., for their well-being, and that I think that's important. So I try to help coaches understand that autonomy is important. Another aspect, referring to self-determination theory, is the concept of competence. We have the psychological need for competence. What does that mean? That means that we want to, on the one side, show that we're capable of something. So what are my competencies? And I do not want to do something I'm not able to do, for example. And on the other side, I want to improve my competencies. I want to learn something new. So, for example, if I'm just referring to football. If I now during the training process, for example, put a striker into the goal and make him the goalkeeper, we are not meeting his competencies because he's not capable of really catching the balls, maybe. Yeah. So I try to assign the different roles during a training session that really fit the competencies of the athlete in front of me. And on the other hand, I try to develop tasks for a certain athlete that really fit his needs in order to improve his competencies. So I don't have general tasks for the overall group. I have specific tasks that fit to individual athletes. So that's one thing, to meet those the needs at that point. And then the last point in self-determination theory is the aspect, the psychological need of relatedness. So we as people tend to have a need for being part of a group. I mean, there's major research on that. And at the same time, there are people who do not like to be part of a group. There are athletes who are part of team sports because they're very good at that. But at the same time, they prefer being on their own and doing their own things and practicing on their own, which is totally fine. And I think it's important to identify the different the needs of the athlete. Is that athlete someone who needs to be left alone, or is that someone who needs to be included in major group activities, or who is that athlete? And so covering those three needs and educating coaches about them and asking them about the experiences that they have with those needs is, I think, absolutely crucial. And from that point, again, I think it's important to have this evidence-based approach, have this theory-based approach in sports psychology. It's not something that I believe that we should do, because that's my subjective perspective. I believe that we should use and employ and apply theories that really help us explain the behavior of the people and therefore change and adjust the behavior of the people.
So let's play with that idea around relatedness, because I love what you've said there. Some people like to be a part of a group, other people not so much, and it kind of makes me think of personality science and introversion and neuroticism, because some people aren't introverted but they're neurotic, they're shy. But it makes me think of individual differences. And I think this is a challenge we have, because we can introduce these theories and we can say, hey, self-determination theory and autonomy, competence and relatedness. And then a coach says, yeah, but hang on a minute, I've got this group of players, 25 players, and I've got to put on these sessions, and I want them to train with intensity, I want them to pay attention, I want them to train effectively because we've got a game on the weekend. But we're coming along and saying, well, yeah, but you've got some players who like to be part of a group and some players who don't like to be part of a group. How does that marry up? How do we help how do we help coaches deal with this notion of individual differences within team sports?
I think that's the question. That's the question, most definitely. I think it's impossible to work on an individual basis when you're working with 24, 25 athletes, or if we're referring to other team sports, rugby, American football, where you have even more athletes.
Yes.
That's impossible. But I think that breaking down your group, your team, into different groups might help already. So there I have the group of those athletes who are who have a very big need for autonomy. All right, so how can I integrate that? How can I satisfy their needs? Then I have a group of athletes who need to be left alone. How can I use that? And then I think the concept of the motivational climate helps. So that I'm referring to mastery, task-oriented climate on the one hand, and ego-oriented climate on the other hand. And I believe, and then it always comes back to the question of what is my level of performance right now. So if I'm referring to the Premier League, I definitely need to have a higher ego orientation in my climate, because basically sport is competitive in nature. But if I'm working on a lower level, referring to all leagues, then I should have a much higher mastery-oriented approach. And referring to individual tasks then and talking with athletes, I think that's crucial. However, I'm fully aware that it's impossible to talk to and with every athlete during every training session, maybe even during a week. What I realized over the last years is, again, the subjective distortion that coaches have. They say, well, but I'm talking with everyone. And that's one of the most important aspects that athletes say. Well, the coach doesn't talk to me; he doesn't see me. Again, referring to satisfying the needs of that athlete. And what we started doing is developing a spreadsheet for the coaches with the names of every single athlete on the team, with a calendar on the top, and then the coach makes an X for every day where he talked to one of the athletes. And the interesting thing that happens at the very end is, after 1 month, the coach says, I definitely wasn't aware that I'm only talking to 15% of the players during almost every training session, and to 30% I do not talk at all, and to the rest I'm talking very randomly. And raising the awareness of my own communication with athletes is very important. And I know that myself, that it's difficult. And there are athletes on my team maybe that I personally don't get along with. There are those players. And I think that's okay. However, I need to be aware of the fact that I'm not there as a private person, and I'm not satisfying my own personal needs. I'm a coach, or if I'm referring to myself as being a sports psychologist, I'm a sports psychologist, and I have to satisfy the needs of that athlete right now. And even if I do not get along with that athlete, I have to talk to him. I have to help her improve. And I think having that professional attitude is absolutely crucial. And I know myself that it's difficult. I definitely know. But I think, to answer your question, it is important to self-reflect all the time. Whose needs am I satisfying right now? Am I satisfying the needs of the athletes, or am I only satisfying my personal needs, working only for my personal benefits? And unfortunately, in sports, 2 years ago, on the ASP conference in Toronto, Association for Applied Sports Psychology conference in Toronto, John Amici, a British basketball player, a former British basketball player, he delivered a wonderful speech, wonderful presentation, and he said one thing that sticks to my mind, and it will always stick to my mind. And he said, in sports, we're working in a system that's not made for the benefit of the athlete. And unfortunately, he's right, because many people are only working for their own benefit. Right now, maybe we see that even during the COVID-19 pandemic, that at least in Germany, for example, the discussion is, all right, do we restart the Bundesliga again? But not because we need to do that or we want to do that. We have to do that due to financial issues. If we do not do that, the TV money doesn't go to our clubs, and clubs will collapse, and we can't do that. So the federations there are putting their own benefits, financial benefits, over the needs of the athletes. There was an interview a couple of days ago here, and one of the players, one of the Bundesliga players said, well, I'm scared. I have no idea what to do. I'm scared to get infected because I do not know if my opponent is infected, although they're tested every day. So athletes are scared, but at the same time, they have to do what they are told to do by the system. And I know now I'm coming from the coach's perspective to the system, and I definitely go back to the coach right now. The point that I wanted to make is, am I working for my own benefits as a coach, or for the benefits of the athlete? And that's a question that we always have to ask ourselves, and that I'm asking myself in sports psychology as well, and that I try to get across to all the people that I'm working with. Whose needs am I trying to satisfy?
There's so many wonderful little things that you said there over the last 5 minutes. I've taken some notes, and I mean, I love this idea. As you know, at the beginning of that discourse, you talked about, you know, the potential to put players in groups or group players in terms of their, I suppose, natural personality tendencies or their typical personality responses, which, as you said, you can absolutely do. You respected the notion that it is an impossibility to get that right all the time, and obviously you've got to, as a coach, you've got to train the team if that's what you're involved with, the team invasion sport. I had a wry smile on my face when you said that you had coaches draw up a grid and tick and cross whenever they'd spoken to a player, and I love that. I had a smile on my face because I can think of a coach that I've worked with who mentioned doing that, and it was eye-opening for that coach, and he had the same revelation. It's like, wow, I speak to these people and I don't speak to those players, and I think it uncovers, I suppose, both conscious and unconscious personal biases, right, in terms of how you feel about others, and you talked a little bit about that. What I really liked about what you said at the end there was this notion of satisfying the needs of athletes. And I think sometimes as coach, we're so socialized in coaching. I've said this a few times on the Sports Psych show before. We're so socialized in coaching into X's and O's, cliche to say it now, but the technical, tactical sides of it. And we're trying to satisfy some kind of needs around those. Have I delivered information on technique and tactics, the game plan, the game model, the principles of play? But we're not necessarily, as coaches, socialized into, am I satisfying the needs of the athlete, the player, the person behind the player? And then I also wrote down, I think, an important question, and a self-reflection question: what behaviours am I engaging in with others? What behaviours? So am I satisfying the needs of the person, the people within my organisation, and what behaviours am I engaging in and around others? What behaviours am I engaging in? And as you said, there's that, certainly at the adult elite level, and especially right now as we're currently recording, we're in lockdown with the threat of COVID-19, and that interplay between what the system demands of us and what we demand of ourselves as coaches, and then what the players want. And there's that push-pull, that three-way push-pull that I think is going on at any given time. No question there, Christian, just any comment you might have on that.
Yeah, thank you for the summary there. I have one aspect, and I'm fully aware of that problem. I was talking about, and you mentioned that, about satisfying the needs of the athlete. And at the same time, I'm fully aware of the fact that we're always referring to the performance and ultimately to the result. So many coaches who are listening right now might think right now, well, I mean, that sounds nice to satisfy the needs of the athlete all the time, but that's impossible. If I only do that, I lose my job because we don't get the results that we need as a team, that sponsors demand or that people want. So I'm fully aware of the fact, of that fact. What I want to do at that point is just to raise the awareness that we have to find a balance between focusing on the results on the one side and the needs of the other on the other side, the needs of the athlete on the other side. It's impossible in sports, in elite sports, to only focus on the needs of the athlete. I'm fully aware of that fact. But by neglecting that and by not talking about that, we won't make it any better. And referring back to the quote I used from John Amici, I always strive to change the system, at least a little bit, in order to improve the mental health for athletes, for example. Before we started recording, we were briefly talking about the 3 pillars of sports psychology. And people always refer to sports psychology only being the performance enhancers. We're not only there for performance development. Some people might see us only as those who are coming with a fire extinguisher when there's a crisis. We're most definitely not a firefighter. So sports psychology is not only performance enhancement. Sports psychology is also personality and character development. And it is also we're also referring to the mental health side, the psychological health of the people, not only athletes, but coaches as well. And we have to keep those 3 pillars in mind. And if athletes and if coaches are not mentally healthy, they won't perform well. So if we are not satisfying the needs of the athletes, they're more likely to develop impaired psychological health and maybe even drop out of the sport. And that can't be the goal, neither for coaches nor for us who are working in sports psychology. And I think we have to keep that in mind, that we have to find the right balance between the person and the athlete behind the needs and the results or the performance that leads to the results.
I think it's interesting because I think you're right. I think that how we, for want of a less crass way of putting this, how we sell sports psychology is important because it makes a difference to how coaches perceive it or what they perceive sports psychology to be. And I think that you use this term 3 pillars of sports psychology. What is sports psychology? And you say, well, there is performance psychology, there is character development or personality development, and there's the mental health piece. And I have something similar in terms of a 3-pronged approach, each one at a deeper level essentially, which would be the performance psychology piece at the surface level. Under that is the welfare and the well-being piece, which for me would incorporate the personality development, and then the mental health piece at the very deepest level. And I think and we'll get your comment on this in a second, I think we as a profession need to do better at helping coaches understand what sports psychology is. That it's not just performance psychology. And the counter of what we're saying here is, I actually come across, Christian, a lot of people who just think sports psychology is just the welfare piece or is just the mental health piece, and they don't realise there's any performance psychology at all. So I think we have to be better at educating, which is a big part of this show, right? And your work and every guest I have on the show, it's a big part of our work to be able to disseminate this information. And then I think once we've done that, the term I wrote down was mental juggling. Mental juggling. I don't think it's too onerous a mental juggle for coaches to then be able to link up this notion of, well, if I actually start to satisfy the needs of athletes from a mental health, a welfare, a well-being, a personality development perspective, that will have a positive impact on performance and subsequent outcomes. But we need to perhaps help them have to have this mental juggle, because at the moment, perhaps sometimes it's like, well, we don't know what sports psychology is, and or there's an attitude of, oh well, you know what, if this player can't leave his or her problems at the gate, then they've got no chance of being the best that they can be, or being a professional, or being an elite amateur, or whatever it is they're striving to be. So I think it's for us, as you're suggesting, to continue to help coaches understand what actually is sports psychology, and then continuing to massage this capacity to mentally juggle athletes' needs towards performance.
Yeah, I totally agree there. And I like the point that you made with that some people only see the welfare, the mental health side in sports psychologists. I mean, that's basically the first thing that people think when you're talking about what psychology is. What people first think, right? You bring your couch and you do some psychoanalysis, and you have to now talk about your bad childhood. That's most definitely not what sports psychology is about. And we have to make coaches aware of the possibilities that sports psychology might give them when they're working with athletes. And I've seen many great developments. For example, in one academy that I used to work in, and I very recently talked to a colleague who's still working there, and she said coaches approach her right now because they realized there is someone that I can talk to and whom I can trust, and I can talk about the fears that I have in that academy. And coaches have fears. They experience anxiety themselves. Maybe on a personal level, maybe on a professional level, maybe due to the limited contracts that they receive. I have no idea about the contract structure in the UK, but in Germany, usually they get a 1-year contract, and maybe it will be prolonged afterwards or not. And I'm pretty sure that's the same thing in most countries. So having someone just to talk to is so important, and we just have to be there. And I think that's one of the, and it really doesn't matter if we're now talking about the sports psychologist or a coach. If we want to help people, and if we want to build a connection to the people and build a relationship with those people, a trusting relationship, we just have to be there. We just have to be there and be willing to listen. I'm pretty sure I will misquote the author. It might be that it was Seneca, who said, we as human beings, we were born with one mouth and 2 ears, and that has a reason. Usually we should listen more than we talk. And I believe that applies no matter in which context that we're working in. If we want to help people understand ourselves better or help them perform better, it's important to listen. For us as sports psychologists, listen to coaches and athletes, or coaches who listen to their athletes. I think that's important.
I think it's interesting because what I'm considering right now as you're speaking, I'm going to go right the way back to the beginning of our conversation and the objections that coaches have, and one of which you said was time. We don't have the time for this, and it's an understandable objection. But listening to what you've said over the last 50 minutes, you've talked about motivational climate and self-determination theory, and those are, as their name suggests, or certainly motivational climate suggests, this is part of what we do to develop our environment, our culture. Self-determination theory can be built into our practices, our coaching processes, our coaching practices. So what I'm hearing you say is time isn't necessarily an excuse from that perspective, because these approaches and interventions can be built into our coaching practices and processes, into our environment and our culture. And then what you spoke about there in terms of, hey, sometimes this, or more often than not, if anything, actually this just comes down to sitting down, having a cup of tea with somebody, being very English there, having a cup of tea with somebody, and just having a conversation. And actually, as you said, using your two ears rather than your mouth, and just being there to lend your ear, being there as a support, and often that's enough. You don't need to impart wise words. You don't need to have an intervention. It's just being there to listen to somebody. And okay, ostensibly that's more time, or that takes time, but I wonder if actually we can't afford not to give that time. We can't afford not to give that time rather than we can't afford the time. So I think it's all built into our practice, and we have to strive to find the time because we can't afford not to give that bit of time.
Yeah. The word that comes to my mind when I'm listening to what you just said is sustainability. And that's what I want to have when I'm working with people. I want to have a sustained result, sustainable results at the very end. And if I do not take the time right now, I will need to invest more time afterwards. I mean, there's the 20-80 rule, right? So depending, you invest more time planning, you invest 80% of your time planning your next project. And conducting it at the very end will only consume 20% of your time, and the result will be great. If you only invest 20% of your time planning, your whole project will be a mess because you have to have 80% of fixing problems here and there. So in order to have sustainable results, you have to invest the time early on. You have to sit down. Yes, it takes more time. But in order to have a good relationship to the person in front of you, so that the athlete really trusts you as a coach on a personal, on a social level, I think it's absolutely crucial to do exactly that.
I think that's fascinating, and I think just final few minutes, something I just want to put to you again. I don't kind of form a question, but just again some thoughts running through my mind. I think because the world is such a smaller place now, whether through technology like this, internet, etc., etc. But we still categorize ourselves. We have a social identity. So I can think back to Dr. Matt Slater's episode on the Sports Psych Show when he talked about social identity and utilizing that for, to develop teams. But we have our own individual identity. Also, I should say, episode number 17 with Jeremy Holt and Dr. Will Thomas, which is really worth listening to on social identity as well. We have an individual identity and we have a social identity. And wrapped up in our social identity, for most of us, is our nationality. And I think it's fascinating speaking to you, Christian, because I think, as almost going full circle back to the beginning, there can be a perception and perhaps a misunderstanding of cross-cultural challenges, or challenges we don't think are cross-cultural. And again, I come back to that idea of, hey, there's a great word out there, Nervenstärke, which I translate as strength of nerves. You might say it's mental toughness. But perception in Britain is Germans have Nervenstärke. Please excuse my pronunciation. You have great strength of nerves. We have a perception about American sports, British sport. We have a perception about Australian sport, Australian capacity to perform under pressure, etc., etc. And it's really interesting you talking about similar challenges that you have in German sport, the German system, I did say there wasn't going to be a question. I just think it's really interesting sharing these ideas and sharing these thoughts and how cross-cultural they are. Motivational climate, self-determination theory, welfare, well-being, mental health. It's the same cross-culturally.
Exactly. Exactly. Sports psychology, or the things that we usually do in sports psychology, are not fixed to be applied in a certain country or certain nationality or certain culture. What we do is applicable on a global level, obviously with some minor tweaks here and there depending on the culture. For example, referring to Asia at that point, which is different. However, the points or the aspects that we can apply there, and the theories, the constructs that you mentioned, motivational climate, etc., help us on a global level. And it really doesn't make a difference if we're talking about the British identity or the German identity or the Australian identity. I think we can work collectively there. And at the same time, we have to be fully aware of the fact of the question of who am I? I'm referring to a very brief experience that I made with one federation, if I may. So from an applied perspective, there is an Asian country who's very strong in one specific sport. I do not, based on the confidentiality, I do not want to go into too much detail there. So that's this country is very, very strong in a very specific sport. And then I asked myself the question: all right, what is it that makes that country so strong? What is it that makes those players so strong? And why can't we learn from them, adapt that, and then we as Germans become the way that they are? And then I sat back in my office and I thought, no, that's not what we're going to do. We have to ask ourselves, who are we? What are our strengths? What is our identity? And we have to build that identity, and we have to strengthen our strengths, and we have to strengthen our identity. And when we go out there, we have to be ourselves. We have to be the Germans at that point. For your listeners, we have to be the British. We have to be the English at that point. And what is it that makes us strong? And we have to ask ourselves this question. And we don't need to become someone else, because someone else is successful the way that they are. We have to understand ourselves and who we need to be in order to become successful. I think that's important. So we have on the one hand, we have those things that we all have in common and that we can apply on a intercultural level. And at the same time, we have to strengthen the strengths inside our own culture, inside our own environment, inside our own club, for example. And I think that this is important, referring to the identity that you mentioned. For me personally, working on the identity, no matter if it's my personal identity as a sports psychologist, as a coach, as a father, as a researcher, or working on the identity as a club, as a federation, as a team, is absolutely crucial to the success of that team. And maybe you know the book from James Kerr about the legacy, yep, about the All Blacks, yep, where they did exactly that. I can definitely recommend reading that book, because I think it gives a good insight into how a team changed the cultural approach and the identity inside a team.
Feels like it comes back to self-skills, but almost from a group perspective or a socio-cultural perspective. Who are we? Who am I? Who are we? How can I get better? How can we get better? It feels it's a flexible combination between the two.
Yes.
Love it. Christian, awesome. Great chat.
Thank you. I really enjoyed that. Yeah.
I know that conversation will spark the interest of many people. So, how can people get hold of you? You've got a website. Are you on? Do you do social media? If you want to be gotten hold of, that is. How can people learn from you?
Well, I have a website which is christianzepp.com. Very easy. I am on Facebook and Instagram, but not that actively involved, to be honest. I am on LinkedIn, the same Christian Zepp. Send me an invitation. I'm happy to accept all those invitations in the future. I used to have a podcast in the past, but due to the time, I had to stop that. I planned actually to restart it in 2020. However, I just realized it's impossible at the moment, but I will try to do in the future. So if you have any questions, just drop me an email, mail@christianzepp.com. I'm always happy to help.
And people can listen to that because you have got quite a few episodes out. They can get it on your website. They can listen to it on your website.
It's on my website, and if you want to look it up on wherever you are, it's just called Zepp FM. Very easy. Yeah.
Zepp FM, really good. Christian, thank you so much for your time, mate. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Dan, for inviting me. It was really a pleasure talking with you about one thing that we both definitely love, and that's sport and sports psychology. And I always enjoyed that. So again, thank you for having me.
Wow, thank you very much. And everyone, that was Christian Zepp. And I really enjoyed that podcast. And I'd love to hear what you, the listener, thinks. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports 8 show. And if you have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.